Today is Monday, July 18th, 2011, and I'm with Andrew Slack, who has been a firefighter with Boulder Mountain Fire Protection District since 2011, and he's lived in Boulder since 1986. Andrew, could you tell me where and when you were born?
I was born in Boulder, Colorado on May 1st, 1986.
Could you tell me a little bit about growing up in Colorado?
Loved growing up in Colorado. It's the West, it's open out here, and you don't have the cluster of cities. Even though Denver's a short distance away, I couldn't have asked for a better place to grow up. From an early age, I was introduced to the outdoors, climbing mountains, rock climbing, doing whatever I could to be outside. And I've always been brought up to be adventurous and help out in the community and really go forth and do the best I can, and I can really attribute a lot of that to growing up in Boulder.
Could you tell me a little bit about your parents?
My mother is Jill Slack. She was born in 1950. She was born on the East Coast in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Came out to CU in the 1960s to attend college. She was a very liberal hippie, the classic mom that you could ask for from the 60s. She was very free-spirited, still is, and definitely a shining light in my life and a good role model. My father, Peter Slack, was born in 1948, also born on the East Coast, and to be honest, I'm not really sure because my father grew up in 11 different places while growing up. But again, he also came out to CU for college. He studied architecture, and again, just a very free-spirited guy. Best way to sum him up was, he dropped out of school for 2 years and moved to Telluride to just start building things. And then he got his architecture degree and came back and really did it for real. And he and his partner are pretty much responsible for half of modern-day Telluride. And it's pretty cool to walk down the streets and see that. And my father passed away in 2000, and that leaves my mother, my brother, Jeremy Slack, and I. My brother was born 2 years after me.
In 1988?
In 1988. We still live in the same house that my dad was the architect of. My father was a volunteer with Boulder Mountain Fire, except when he was a volunteer, it was called Pine Brook Hills Fire Department. And for a couple years in the 90s, I think from like 95 to 97, he was actually the chief. He gave 19 years of service until his death, and with that in architecture, that became the passion of his life. And he eventually wrote a book that he just published right before he passed away, and it was called Firewise Construction. And it was the culmination of his two passions, architecture and fire. And it's pretty much an instruction manual on how to build a home correctly in the West, in the wildland-urban interface, in the forests where we have many ecosystem, ecosystem encounters, I guess, that we have to balance both interests. And fire is a very real threat to us, and honestly, our development is a very real threat to the environment. And he came up with ways to really develop property in the mountains responsibly and environmentally friendly and safe from fires. And it became a leading book for a while with the Forest Service, insurance companies, architectural firms on how to build and what materials to use, where to build the house. And he really is one of the leading figures in fire mitigation and Firewise Construction.
Could you tell me a little bit about the schools that you went to in Boulder County and the experiences that you've had, the responsibilities that you've held in Boulder County?
So I graduated from the University of Colorado. I got a bachelor's in environmental studies and history and a minor in geography. I did an honors thesis there that was definitely the culmination of my college career and high school career, all of it, and it was an amazing time. I studied the regeneration of lodgepole pines after fires, and I was seeing what factors influenced how many trees came up after the fire. It really introduced me to land management, ecology, fire, and I fell in love with all of it, and it threw me into trying to build a career in land management and fire, and it feels really good to actually carry on the legacy in my family. Anything else that you want to talk about with that question? What was it again?
It was, could you tell me a little bit about how you grew up in Boulder County and any responsibilities that you've held?
Okay. I've always been a pretty diverse person. I've always tried to get involved with many things, and the most responsibility I've ever held is the activities I've done. Like, I was a peer counselor in high school, and that was a time in my life where emotional thought was very deep in me, and that was how I got involved, was being a peer counselor, talking with other people about these deep emotional issues of growing up in adolescence. Moving on into college, I became a volunteer for Special Olympics in Boulder Expand, and the leadership I learned in that has been amazing, and it has taught me a lot of responsibility to really take care of people and take care of a team, because I've never really been in a coaching opportunity until then. And I coach a basketball team, and I also coach a softball team. And the best part of the entire gig is being able to spend time with my brother, who is shows symptoms of autism. He's pretty high functioning, but Special Olympics and Expand has been his #1 outlet, and it's the one thing that we've been able to do together and pretty enjoy it very much. Moving on from that, I hope to continue to volunteer as a firefighter, and this is the most responsibility I've ever had in my life. I have to go out there every day with chainsaws and hoses and put literally my life on the line, and to be honest, I don't ever think about that. That was the first time I've ever thought about how dangerous it really is, and but I love every moment of it, and I hope to continue to grow, to gain more responsibility with equipment and carry on to get as much training as I can in the field. I don't really want to make it a career, but a secondary choice, so I really hope to carry on more training in it soon.
Could you tell me how you became involved in volunteer firefighting?
It really sparked from my passion in being outside and trying to find a career in what I wanted to do. And when I did my honors thesis, that was the answer, and it was the golden ticket. And while I was graduating from college, I was trying to find opportunities, and I knew that my dad had volunteered for the fire department, and a bunch of the people on the department knew who I was, knew who my family were, and I called them right after I graduated and said, hey, I want to volunteer, and they're like, great, we actually have a rookie academy next week. That was in December of 2010, and I attended their rookie academy, went to the Christmas party, met everyone and fit in, and I just really hit it off with the department, and it just kind of clicked, fell into it, and it just started with one phone call, and I guess that's how it always goes. And I'm really happy to be involved with this department, and I really enjoy the people that I'm working with.
Could you tell me your first experiences with wildland fire in Boulder County?
Yeah. The day I got my red card, I was throwing a barbecue, and my pager goes off right as I sit down for dinner, and it says lightning strikes in our district, smoke report. I was hesitant to go because I had friends over, but after about 5 minutes I was like, okay, I gotta go. I get ready and go up to the station, and there's a report of a strike with flames in the grass growing up to this house. We get into our medical truck, which is a Type 6 wildland fire engine. It pretty much just 3 men fit in it, and you have a tank of 300 gallons on the back, and it's ready to go for a quick attack. We went up there, and the fire was actually already out by the time we got there because rain had put it out, and it was kind of uneventful, but it was the first time I really felt that adrenaline rush of the pager going off and not really knowing what to expect until you get on scene. The second time, much more happened. It was the second in a series of fires that have happened in Left-Hand Canyon this spring and summer. The first was in March. The second, which I was able to be on, was in the beginning of June, I think, like June 2nd. It was about a 2-acre fire that started in the shooting range over in Left Hand. There's been a bunch of controversy recently over trying to close that, but I guess that's a whole nother issue that we may or may not get into. But the call dropped when I was at lunch. I had just actually taken a nap and I was perfectly refreshed, so couldn't have been better timing. We get down there and we're actually one of the first engines on scene, so they're trying to put together a quick hand crew to go up and start digging line, and it was pretty thrilling to be on the initial attack, and I got to go in there and get right on the right flank of the fire and dug line up this incredibly steep hill, and actually created quite a bit of dangers with rollouts and rocks, and the whole time the flames were just driving the fire up the hill. It was still relatively green, so the fire wasn't moving fast, and we weren't expecting it to blow up, so we weren't moving very fast, but worked hard. It took like 3 hours for us to dig line to the top of the ridge, and it was very thrilling having fire next to me, and I got amazing experience on the fire. On the way back down, when we were cleaning up our line and making cup trenches on the steep hill, I got a chance to actually swamp for a sawyer, and he was explaining to me all the methods that you choose in deciding whether or not to take down a tree, and it was just an amazing learning experience. And the one part I think about in hindsight with this fire was the fact that we were on this really steep hill, and constantly these boulders were rolling down the size of watermelons, even bigger, and someone would scream rock at the top of your lungs, then everyone repeats it, and the smoke's kind of blowing in your face. You can't see 2 or 3 feet in front of you, and all you can think is just to jump behind something that can give you protection. And I remember a couple of times just hearing the rock and not knowing where it was, and that was definitely a heart-stopping moment a couple of times there. That was a great fire. I really hope to get another experience like that. The other fires I've been on so far this year, there was a small fire that is unknown ignition. No one knows how it started. It was below a house. We got there quick, got hose lays down and knocked it down really quick, and it was pretty straightforward. And then the most recent fire I was on was the third in the series of fires in Left-Hand Canyon. Again, started near the shooting area. This time it burned about 60 acres, I think. And I didn't get it on initial attack, but the next day I was in mop-up, and it was a good experience to really understand how to use an engine. I got to be on pumps and hose, and laying down hose lays and taking down anything that was flaming within the fire. And I mean, it was that one really showed me how hard of work firefighting is, because it's 13 hours straight of being out there, churning everything up, digging everything up, chopping everything down, knocking down all the flames, just making sure that everything's out and using as little water as possible. And the less water you can use, the more strength you have to put into it. And it really showed me what a full day's work is. And yeah, so that's my fire experience thus far. It is looking to be a busy year.
Could you tell me a little bit about the people that you're working with?
Yes. So I work on the mitigation crew for Boulder Mountain Fire. Steve Lynn is our coordinator, and he is a great learning experience for me. I hope to go out into the field and learn how to mark trees and understand the best ways to actually mitigate the forest around homes, which trees to specifically take. And yeah, the in-field crew boss, there's a guy named Mike. Should I give full names? Yeah, all right. His name's Mike Palomaro. He is just a couple years older than me. He's been a firefighter and working on the MIC crew for about 5 or 6 years now. And he's an amazing resource. He has more training than anyone else on the department, and he's been on so many fires, and he can tell you anything that you want to know. And it's great working with him. And actually today he was teaching me some sawing techniques. We've been doing it for a couple weeks now, and got to take down the biggest tree I've ever taken down. And it was he's been a great leader to have, because he gave me great support and confidence to take down this 30-foot ponderosa today. And felt pretty good. Some other guys on the crew, there's this guy, his name is Zach Lynn. He is the nephew of Steve. He's a young guy. He's just out of high school. He has his associate's degree, and he's looking to get involved in the firefighting community. He's really taking a passion to it, I think, and he wants to be on a hotshot crew next summer, and just a great guy to work with, pretty enthusiastic, and definitely works hard. And it's all these guys, they work really hard, and it's great to be able to be out there for 10 hours and not have a single person complain or anything, and just everyone pushes each other almost as a competition, and we're very safe about it at the same time, like even pushing each other to like drink the most water and all that. And it's really good to have a group of guys like that. A couple other guys, there's Tim Farrell, who's also a volunteer on the department. He is a very involved member. He's been on very many calls this year, and he's a great experience again to just have an overall emergency response knowledge base, and he definitely can provide that. There's also Terry Donovan, who we've been missing lately. His back's hurt, and hopefully he'll get back into the field with us, but he's definitely a great guy. He's in a position where he can really give his time to the department, and he's very devoted and volunteer again, and I can't say enough about Terry. He's a great guy.
Could you tell me a little bit about the controversy over the shooting range in Left-Hand Canyon?
Yeah. So we've had 3 fires this year in Left-Hand Canyon. They have all started in the general area of the shooting range, and it's becoming quite a concern in the community. Directly, there's no threats in the area, but if the fire were to drop the canyon or cross the canyon, there's a bunch of communities in Boulder Heights that would be threatened immediately. And you have a north-facing slope there with a very dense forest. The fire could run up there very quickly. A lot of people are concerned, and understandably so. So there's a general outcry to close down the shooting range and prevent future incidents such as this. Personally, I believe that they should keep it open, just because if you shut it down, everyone who goes there is just going to go someplace else. And as sad as it seems sometimes, there is a lot of trash everywhere in the place, but I'd rather keep it to the place where it already exists. And to be honest, they've almost burned out the entire forest around it, and it's not like it's going to burn again anytime soon. So I say keep it open and leave them there, but the communities involved have the biggest say in that, because their properties are directly next to it.
You talked a little bit earlier before we started filming about your first memories of wildland fire, and it being the Black Tiger Fire. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the Black Tiger Fire was in 1989. It was in the Sugarloaf neighborhood. I don't remember how big it was. I just remember it being a pretty big fire, pretty big deal. Obviously, I can remember it still, and I was only 3 years old. The 2 most vivid memories I have is I think I was in the bathtub, and my dad just got home from being on the line for 3 days, and soot was all over him, and had charcoal smeared all over him from head to toe, and I just didn't recognize him at first, to be honest. I think I kind of remember being like slightly scared, but then, you know what, I remember the smell. That's the key, and the smell brought me back, and I knew it was my dad, and it was just the coolest thing ever. I mean, it's a very hazy memory. I'm probably even making up some of this, but I probably asked him tons of questions. I remember being very fascinated with fire at a very young age, so I'm sure I was asking him all about it. I knew about the fire from before I can remember, like where it burned, and I mean, I didn't know how big it was, but I had a general idea of the geography of it. And I know of people that lost their homes in it, and it's just before I can remember, it had an impact in my life. The other memory I have, I think it was I'm pretty sure it was a benefit concert, and our very good family friend and his band were playing at it, so we went up there to watch it, and I have like a snapshot memory of his band playing on stage, but the memory I really remember is driving home and seeing the forest completely burned down and just being so frightened, because it was this full moon silhouetting these charred trees that, you know, the branches have burned so severely that they're like spikes coming out, and it just has death and danger written all over it. And being a 3-year-old, I remember being quite frightened. Those are the 2 memories I have from the Black Tiger.
Do you remember your dad being called to other firefighting responsibilities?
I do. For some reason, the Black Tiger fire sticks out a little more. But I do remember the Olde Stage Fire a little bit more. That was in 1994. My biggest memory from that was being evacuated and seeing the plume of smoke and looking back and like realizing my house was just to the left of the plume of smoke, and I remember that was pretty crazy. I don't remember any stories that my dad told me about the fire, but I've now, since on the department, I've heard stories about the fire that it just sounds to me like it was a very intense situation. And I heard this one story of a gentleman who got caught out in a meadow, and the flame front was rolling towards him pretty fast, and another gentleman was sitting on the road with his truck, and he goes up in his truck to try and get this guy out of the middle of the meadow, and he gets stuck himself, and he jumps out of the truck, gets a flare, lights it on the ground, and just walks into the black to save both of them. And I thought that was a pretty cool story of thinking on your toes. I also have heard the trickiness of fighting fires, because Olde Stage is a very densely populated area, and just the trickiness of trying to make line, whether it's digging line, a wet line, or even doing backburns around a house after house like it's suburbia, and definitely it was a huge challenge for them. And I'm trying to think if I have any other earlier memories of when I was younger. And I remember actually seeing ash in our yard as we returned, and that was kind of spooky. And that was probably the closest fire in all that we've had. And
When was this?
This was the Olde Stage Fire, 94, I'm pretty sure. Maybe 90. It's early 90s, I think.
I feel like it might have been when we were in 5th grade.
5th grade?
I remember your father being called while we were on a field trip.
Yeah? That I think was a different fire. That was one in Lyons, I'm pretty sure, but I don't recall which one specifically. Trying to think of any other calls that I remember. I remember him going on medical calls, and those were always scary. Hearing of rollover accidents, and I remember hearing about this one where the lady rolled her car into the creek, and just seeing the look on my dad's face as he returns, as they realized they couldn't save her, and that's a reality of being in the emergency response field. And I haven't come across it yet, but I definitely remember how my dad felt after that happened, and definitely brought the reality of the situation home.
Were you really close to your dad?
was very close with him. He worked at home, so I was very fortunate to spend a lot of time with him. And together we were very involved with sports. He was always taking me to my practice, going to all my games, and primarily soccer. He even encouraged me to like branch out to baseball and other things like that. He always took me mountain biking and hiking and skiing. And yeah, and he even got me involved in the fire station. He loved to take me when he was working on a truck or working on some kind of radio thing or whatever the situation was, but he'd always take me to the fire station with him, and I did get to spend a great deal of time with him. And you know, I only had him for 14 years in my life, but I'm very fortunate for all of those years, and I definitely honor that quite a bit.
Could you tell me a little bit about the Fourmile Fire, what you remember from the second that it started, or the second that you realized that it started onwards?
Yeah, I was on campus when it started, and I was walking to the geography building, and I saw this plume of smoke, and immediately I knew it was a fire. It was a crystal clear blue sky day, and you just see that, and you're like, oh gosh. And I go into the lab for a little bit, but not really thinking about it, and when I came out, I saw that the plume of smoke was like 10 times bigger, and the smoke was darker. You could see black smoke coming up, and I just knew immediately, like, this is not good. It had been very dry for a number of weeks, and I immediately feared the worst, and it kind of stunk having the motivation at that point to really join the fire department, but had not yet joined, and being kind of stuck on the sidelines. And that was definitely a very encouraging moment to join up on the fire department. I remember just constantly checking into the news, seeing how big it was, seeing where it was spreading, because I knew that, you know, my house was in a direct line of the direction that the winds were going, and trying to get any information I could on what was going on. I had a friend at the point, Carl Cumley, who was fighting the fire, and I even remember texting him and calling him to figure it out, and finally he got back to me on the second night and said, I think your house is going to be fine, you're okay. And that was the first time I really kind of calmed down about it, and more tried to just not like relish in the situation, but kind of soak it in and experience what was going on. It was the first time I got myself, like, was so involved in an incident that I was listening to the radio, the communications radio, and checking the incident website like constantly, and it definitely sparked something in me.
What sort of conversations did you have with your mother at that point?
My mom's funny about these events. She kind of has no fear about it, and it's almost like if we're religious, it's the will of God. She has that kind of attitude. Whatever happens, happens, and she doesn't stress herself out about it. She's good enough, and she's been through enough of these now that she has an evacuation plan ready, and she gets the essentials and gets out of there. I called her the first night she was staying at some friend's house, and she told me that everything was fine and that she got everything, and that she wasn't worried, and she probably wasn't going to pay attention either. And so we only checked in a couple of times, to be honest, during the fire. I think we have this attitude of, my mom being a widow, she wants to move to town, and being 2011 and us still being in a recession, it's hard to sell a house at these days. So, if the house were to go in a fire, I don't think we'd be too upset, because it would get us to town for one, and not only that, it was our house. My dad built it. It seems only fitting that we're the only ones that lived in it, and being who I am and being who my father was, if the house had to go, what better way than a fire? So we wouldn't be too upset if we lost it. We just got to make sure, have our evacuation plan down, and we get everything out.
Did you know other people who were evacuated?
Yes, I had a couple friends that lost homes in the fire. This woman I worked with at Spruce Confections, Jessie Nuzzi, Her parents were actually separated, and sadly she lost both homes in the fire. I called her at one point, and she picked up and she told me what happened, and I mean, all I could really offer was my condolences, and she was a pretty tough girl, and I think her and her families are doing okay. I haven't spoken to her recently. My mechanic lost his home, and not only that, but during the fire he was working on my car, and at first I wanted to tell him, like, you know, you need to go handle stuff. It's okay, like, my car doesn't need to be fixed. But then I realized that's how he was escaping from the situation, and he really needed to keep working and just get through it that way. He lost his house on the first day, and he knew it, and because he was at home and he saw it coming, and he got out of there pretty quick. And I remember him feeling pretty solemn about it, but you know, this is my mechanic, and how far can you take that relationship? So beyond that, I don't really know. He's a great guy though, and I wish him the best. I heard of other people that, you know, I knew at a time that had lost their home. A friend of ours, Nate Wheeler, who lost his home. And you know, it really struck home in the community, and I'm sure almost everyone in town knows someone who lost their home, and it really made people look at fires a little more seriously. To give you an idea, this is the mitigation list we have is humongous this year. We're like 2 months behind in work. We can't catch up, and actually the other problem is we have so many events with fires, and when we don't have fires, it's flooding, so we're not really getting to our work too much these days. But hopefully we can get back out there and get back to why everyone was so inspired to call us in the first place. And yeah.
What did the community of Boulder feel like from September 6th onward?
Very mixed, I feel like. There's a lot of people who are just like, that's where we live. I mean, if you live up there, you know what's going to happen, and you know the reality of it. And there's a lot of people out there who understand that. And then there's another whole group of people who are outraged that, you know, living in the 21st century, that we could let something like this happen. And then there's people who are frightened of it, trying to like sell their house and get out of there as quickly as possible, or you know, completely regret why they lived up there in the first place, which, you know, to me is so sad, because it's such a beautiful place. And yeah, there is the reality of a fire, but you know, if you prepare for it and you understand the reality of it, it's the peace of mind it can come. So yeah, the community of Boulder has been a very mixed bag in the reaction to the Fourmile Fire.
Could you tell me a little bit about the flooding that's happened recently?
Yeah, so after a big fire, the next summer, or if the fire happens in the summer, just immediately, there's always the risk of intense flooding. When you burn out all the vegetation, there's nothing to capture the soil. It just completely runs off into the streams, and you have severe flash floods. The last couple weeks, we've had a lot of rain. It's saturated the soils completely, and last Wednesday night, it hit a tipping point, and the huge thunder cell went right through the 4 Mile burn area, and completely flooded 4 Mile Canyon, Sunshine Canyon, and 4 Mile Canyon Creek, which is in our district, and that was our area of concern. But hearing on the radio, you know, a few roads washed out in both 4 Mile and Sunshine, cars were stranded, people were stranded, and it was kind of a chaotic situation for a couple of days. I can tell the experiences of what I experienced on Wagon Wheel Gap. There was a 7-foot storm surge that came through there, and that is enough to completely dam up the culverts and wash up over the road, start destroying the road. Any home that is near the creek, it flooded up to the first level, flooded basements, just tossed debris everywhere. And Thursday morning, we had gotten the weather report that, you know, we're looking for the exact same round of thunderstorms again, and we had to prepare for it to happen again. And being on the mitigation crew, we're first out there to try and take care of the situation. And we just started at Bow Mountain Road, about a mile up from Lee Hill, and worked our way down to Lee Hill, clearing out driveways, making sure people were safe. And it was just crazy to dig out this debris where you have duff and pine needles and twigs and branches and then logs the size of people, and you keep digging and you hit it and you're just like, what is this? And you unearth it and it's just this huge tree, and you're just, how do I deal with this? And it was a pretty crazy situation. And then, you know, we come up on culverts and you have huge trees and branches blocking them, and you have to saw them, cut it out, drag it out, and stack it all along the road and make sure, or actually we had to toss it up the hill to make sure that the floodwaters wouldn't get them again. You know, it was a hard day of work, and it's so funny. There's this one culvert at the bottom of the road that's literally about this big, and it's, I don't know if you can see this, but maybe like 1.5 feet, 2 feet across in diameter, and it's supposed to sustain this creek at average flow, but when you get a 7-foot storm surge, it immediately floods up. So it plugged up Wagon Wheel Gap for about 1/4 mile, and there's actually some footage on YouTube of this section, and it just looks like a river roaring down this what's supposed to be a road. And it was pretty hectic there. We actually couldn't do anything. It was beyond our ability. We had to call in a backhoe to dig it out. There's so much mud and debris there. But yeah, the worry with flooding continues. The grounds are still saturated. Just today we had another cell roll through. It didn't produce nearly the rain that they were expecting, so not much happened. But definitely it puts you on your toes when you see that dark thunderhead coming these days.
Could you tell me a bit about how your education has affected your firefighting?
Yeah. To be honest, I think I annoy most of my coworkers because I'm always just like, yes, but if we do this, what are we doing to the ecosystem? And you know, they just want to take big things and make them into little things. That's the motto on the MIC crew. My education has really influenced the way I look at this. Not just looking at the event of fire, I'm looking at what caused the fire, what the situation was in the environment and in the ecosystem that led up to the fire occurring and where it went, how intense the fire got. And then probably my favorite part is studying after. What happens after? What species are going to move in? Will this old growth forest be completely reborn into like a brand new lodgepole forest? It's just so interesting to see the progression of all 3 stages, and then the final stage, it's just the rebirth, and it can go anywhere. It's just a blank slate that can do anything. It's really, really cool to study what actually influences what actually happens. I really hope to continue this education deeply. I love firefighting, but really my focus is understanding the deeper ecological aspects of what's going on. And I am very passionate about, you know, solving some big questions about the wildland-urban interface and how we really can live sustainably in the forest and produce these ecosystems on our properties that are healthy and work with us, and beautiful open ponderosa woodlands. That's what I imagine someday, and I really hope to get there.
Has anything surprised you since you're pretty new to the actual firefighting, even if you did have experience with your father being a firefighter?
Not really. I knew what I was getting myself into. You know, you'd think maybe I'd be surprised by the whole emergency response aspect of it, because I have to respond to any 911 call in my district. But I really did know what I was getting myself into, and even before I signed up, I thought maybe I would have to take my EMT at some point. But since getting in, actually this is a little bit of a surprise that they're really letting me focus on wildland, and I can really make structural or medical kind of a backdrop, and which is really nice to have that flexibility. Another thing that actually this surprised me a little bit too, how rigorous the chain of command is. It's very militaristic, and you really follow your chain of command. You listen to your higher up. You don't approach your higher up's higher up or whatever. You listen and take your orders and do exactly as you're told. And it makes perfect sense that to have that, because you're fighting a fire, and keyword fighting. You have to be organized to really be able to fight it and succeed. But I guess I've never really been a person to fall in line, so it's been a bit of a shock to me to really adjust to that. But I think I'm doing pretty well with it, and learning to keep in my place.
You talked about your father a little bit earlier in his book. Could you go into a little bit more depth with that?
Yeah, his book is called Firewise Construction. It's pretty much just almost like a how-to manual on how to build a house in the wildland-urban interface, specifically in the Ponderosa woodlands here that we have in the foothills of Boulder County. What materials to use, where you should site the house, and it covers a whole range of topics. To give you a couple examples, obviously you don't really want to build your house out of wood, or it'll go up like a match. Some alternatives are, there's cement siding that you can use that looks exactly like wood. It is probably a little bit more expensive, but it won't burn. It'll keep your house safe. And then there's simple things of just don't place your deck on the downhill side of your house, because that open space underneath the deck will trap heat and get it really hot under there and pretty much combust what it will. You can do alternatives of just placing your deck on the uphill side or on the side of your house if you really want to look at the downhill side view or something like that. And even as simple as the materials on the deck, there's these fiberglass, well, maybe not fiberglass, I don't know the material exactly. It's kind of like a plastic wood board, but again, it won't burn, so it'll keep your house safe. Really, the best thing you can do is get defensible space around your house. Make sure that you don't have a closed canopy going up to your house, and a lot of the book brings in mitigation techniques. It puts a lot on the homeowner too, and the book says that it needs to do this to keep meadows and grasslands weed whacked and trimmed up, so a fire can't build momentum as it comes up to the house. What's going to burn the house is radiant heat, so you just got to minimize that as much as you can. I'm not as interested in the architectural side as my dad was, but I get it, and it's really interesting how I'm in pretty much the same field that he was, but looking at it from a whole different aspect. And I really hope to intertwine what he worked on as much as I can and what I will continue to do.
Have you talked to many of your coworkers and the firefighters who you're now working with, the volunteer fire department, with, or have you talked to them about your father?
A little bit. I find when I bring my father up, it makes other people awkward, so I tend to not bring it up too often. There are a couple people who knew my dad, and they say things to me every once in a while that are very touching. Chief Benson, for instance, knew my father, and after the flood last Wednesday, for instance, he just looked at me and he was like, "I'm really proud of you. You worked so hard, and I know your dad is incredibly proud of you." And to bring that up was quite touching. And besides that, people have told me, like, I knew your dad. He was an amazing man. It's great to see you out here following in his footsteps. And I think a lot of people are pretty touched themselves to see that I've done this. And it's great to follow in your dad's footsteps like that. And builds a connection with the department right from the get-go.
What do you see your involvement being in the future with the fire department in Boulder County?
I'm going to try and stay as involved as I can. I do want to go to grad school in the near future, and that's probably going to take me out of the state. You know, I really do see myself living in Boulder eventually again probably for the rest of my life once I do come back, and probably then again, no matter what my job is, I know I will be a volunteer for a department, hopefully for Boulder Mountain Fire, because that's the neighborhood I grew up in and I would love to stay involved with them. But you know, for the next year I'm just gonna try and continue to work with them, and I'll probably have to say goodbye temporarily sometime in the fall next year.
Are there any other questions or issues that you'd like to talk about before we're done with this interview?
You know, there's one other issue maybe I could talk about. There's this idea of a fire department being able to go from property to property and decide that in the event of a fire, could you save it? And you know, that brings in a lot of issues in this country of obviously rights to privacy and rights to land ownership, and the government shouldn't be involved with any decisions on your private property. But you have to understand that a volunteer fire department has to put their resources where they're best used. There's no way that even all of Boulder County's resources could effectively put enough resources on what happened with the Fourmile fire. There's still, I mean, you gotta pick wisely, and the ability to have that planned out before the event happens is key. It can mean the difference in other structures that could be saved, that might have not had you wasted your time on a structure that just could not have been saved no matter what. I've heard of policies in Montana where it's kind of a red rock, blue rock policy, where you place a rock on the driveway that tells you whether or not it can be saved. So if a fire truck comes up to it, they'll just skip it and move on to the next. You know, it's a very controversial idea, and I believe, you know, it went to the courts. I guarantee this will continue to be a controversial idea. It's hard to mandate people to do things on their private property, but you know, it's the tragedy of the commons too. We all live in the same community, and what you don't do on your property affects your neighbors. If you don't mitigate your forest, fires will pick up momentum and then destroy your neighbor's house. And I'd really hope to see an evolution in the way people think and kind of get on board with listening to what needs to be done to make our forests healthy and really live there effectively and successfully.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.